In this lesson, we're going to learn about the elements of color. In front of you, you see a pretty typical color wheel. This type of color wheel is called a Urimbi color wheel, and you'll find out soon why it's called that. Nevertheless, color has a few properties to it, one of which you already know, which is value, which is the brightness or the darkness of something. The next one we're going to take a look at is hue. Hue basically refers to all these different colored segments, not necessarily the color itself, but rather the frequency range or the color range that the particular color falls into. And so, in order, we have yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, and green. And the word Urimbi comes from the yellow, red, magenta, blue, going back into the yellow section. Don't know necessarily why they left out C and G, but something that is important to note is it's good to come up with a mnemonic for yourself so that you can remember all these segments, because the color wheel, knowing the color wheel off by heart, helps you know what intermediary colors a color can move to in its particular range. So obviously yellow goes into oranges, oranges moves into reds, reds into pink reds into sort of magentas, magentas into purples, and so on and so forth. Now, another important thing about hues is that colors are divided into warm colors and cool colors. And I'll split the wheel now to show you the warm and cool split, which is around here. And warm and cool colors tend to really contrast one another. Warm colors, as the name implies, feel warm and heated. Cool colors feel cool and cold. And as we move through the course, you'll start to see how having a good interaction between warm and cool, and also how we treat warm and cool when we're lighting objects, is a very important facet of understanding hues. So we have color, we understand value is brightness and darkness, and we understand hue, warm colors and cool colors as well. But there is a third element, and that third element is saturation. Saturation refers to the amount of gray in a particular hue. So if we look at this orange segment here, as it moves to the center of the color wheel, it gets less and less color rich. It has more and more gray in it. In this instance, we call this neutral gray, or the 50% gray. So saturation, you can regard it as the amount of gray, or you can regard it as the color richness. So it either has a lot of gray or a little bit of gray, essentially, and that will saturate or desaturate the color. Now, when you combine this color wheel into the information and the knowledge you have about value, you have a very broad range of colors to work with. Tons of different brightness and darkness levels combined with tons of different saturation levels combined with tons of different hues. And obviously the color wheel is a simplification of the hues, because as you can see on the color picker here in Photoshop, you know, the hue levels just quite crazy. Most computers support 24-bit color, which is 24 million colors, and in reality the range is significantly higher than that, I'm led to believe. Okay, but nevertheless, these are the core elements of the color wheel and the core elements of color. Now, there is some addendum information to be spoken of as well, and it's more about terminology. You may have heard these terms before: shades, tints, and tones. What is a shade? What is a tint? What is a tone? To be honest with you, day-to-day life, most people misuse these, particularly the word tones, but I suppose it does have a use in music as well. But nevertheless, shades, tints, and tones are separate elements. A shade is when you add black to a color, or degrees of black, right? You'll start getting the shade or the shadow values of that particular hue. Tints, on the other hand, is when you add white to a particular hue. And tones are the varying steps of saturation. It's when you add gray to a particular hue. So those are what shades, tints, and tones are. And having this vocabulary under your belt, and this understanding will be very useful to you when you're painting and coloring your work. All right. So as an example, let's take this red, for example, and I'm going to get a painting brush here. And what I'm going to do is slowly increase the darkness of it to give me different shades of that particular red. You can see we get quite a nice spectrum. Tints of this red, on the other hand, have us increasing the amount of white in the color. And once again, you see a very nice spectrum. And last but not least, tones have us dealing with the saturation level. And so here we will move more toward gray on Photoshop's particular color picker here. So we'll move to a 50% gray in a diagonal fashion. So we'll desaturate it a little bit more. And those are variations of tones. And that really is color in a nutshell. That is the lesson, and I will see you in the next lesson.